Valeria Richards.
Great Victor Von Doom.
Valeria, you cannot control the cosmic cube. It will destroy everything.
The cosmic cube? That's what's causing this?
I can remake this one. I'm going to make it perfect. I'm going to get it all back. Everything I lost.
At what cost?
At any cost. They are coming here. Wolverine.
I'm not playing your game.
Black Widow.
Something big's going on here, huh?
Star-Lord.
We're likable guys.
Hawkeye.
Okay, so we're all here. We've all been assembled. Yeah, whatever. We're all friends. Big happy family.
Avengers! Assemble! And what happens to us?
We all of us, die.
Nah, that's less cool.
Marvel Entertainment and Sirius XM present Marvel's Wastelanders, starring Dylan Baker as Dr. Doom, Timothy Busfield as Star-Lord, Stephen Lang as Hawkeye, Robert Patrick as Wolverine, and Susan Sarandon as Black Widow. Hear it now anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts. Plus, unlock exclusive bonus episodes by subscribing to Marvel Podcast Unlimited on Apple Podcasts. Or subscribe on the SXM app for early access to the next episode. Learn more at SiriusXM.com/Wastelanders.
If you're a New York homeowner, then you could qualify to receive $19,400 to stop paying your
All right. Good evening. This evening we are talking. Well, first off, if you haven't been listening to the Marvel's Wastelanders series, then you definitely should, because joining me today is one of the people who's involved with the project, and we're going to talk a little bit about. He is the composer and sound designer, and so we're going to bring him in and let him introduce himself, and then we'll talk a little bit about the podcast.
Hey, everybody.
Evening.
How's it going? Good. Glad to be here.
So before we get talking about your work with the Wastelanders, tell us a little bit about yourself. What have you done, and your background?
Sure. So my name is Lindsay Jones, and I'm a composer and sound designer for theater and film and TV, as well as podcasts. And I started off working in theater and then have gradually transitioned into film and TV, and now have this new career over the last few years of transitioning into podcasts, where I do all of the music and sound design for different podcasts. For Marvel Wastelanders, I just did the music, and the sound design was done by this team called 10,000 Birds, who are amazing. And they did an incredible job on the show. So I just did the music for Wastelanders, but there are other podcasts that I'm currently working on as well, and I do music and sound design for them.
So what was your, are you a comic book reader yourself? Are you, what was the first comic book that you remember reading?
My father collected comic books when he was a kid. And so at a young age, he handed over a series of comic books to me, and I got totally obsessed by them. So I think one of the very first comic book I read was like Amazing Spider-Man, like issue 18. It was something really early, and it was Spider-Man versus I want to say Dr. Octopus in that comic book, and I was totally captivated. I collected comic books all throughout my youth, and then when I got to be in my 20s, I sort of left it behind, and I got really interested in music and things like that, and so that sort of took me there. And then when I I had children, my son became super interested in the MCU, the cinematic universe. So I have now seen all of the Marvel Cinematic Universe films, and while I would not say that I'm an avid comic book reader these days, I do my best to try and keep up as best I can. And certainly in working on Wastelanders, I tried to represent where Marvel's sort of aesthetic is in this sort of part of their history.
So how did you come to be involved with the Wastelanders program? Because the one you're working on is like the final that ties all the ones together. And so what's your history with this project?
So I am very fortunate that one of the directors of production for the Marvel podcast series is a woman named Jill DeBoff, who is a former sound designer and used to work in theater. And she and I were colleagues, and we've been friends for many years. And also the director of Marvel Wastelanders, which is Kimberly Senior. She's also a theater director, and we work together a lot. And so for this final series of this sort of, as you say, like a whole sort of like, it's like all these series comes together and tie up at the end. They thought it would be great to have me come in for this final series and create the music for it, which I was super, super excited to do.
So kind of what was your process when you were coming up, composing the music for the series? And, because I mean, as I've heard on it, I love the series, and, the music is always, it just adds, an extra layer to the story. So how did you, what inspired you to, make the music what it is?
So this series of Wastelanders is split sort of between two sort of dimensions. The first is what we refer to in our world is the Marvel City, and it's sort of like this flashback type situation in which Marvel heroes are fighting villains, and it feels like a contemporary world. And so for that part of the series, I tried to make music that sounded as close to what the current Marvel Cinematic Universe of score sounds like. So I really tried to emulate the current films that have been coming out over the last few years, and they're sort of cinematic, like these big epic orchestral scores that are like that. And then the other half of it, because Wastelanders is actually set in a distant future in which the villains that we know, Dr. Doom and other people like that, are actually in power, and the heroes are looked at as bad people. They're sort of hunted by modern society. And it is a distant future in which that environment is in ruins. And that is where the Wastelander name sort of comes from, which is that society has sort of been destroyed and it's a remnant of what it was. So for that music and that environment, I tried to make music that was very sort of like electronic, glitch heavy,
dissonant.
Yeah, makes it feel like it was like it's kind of broken, something's wrong with it, and also give these sort of wide open spaces of you're in these long sort of desert scapes where nothing is around because the environment that they're in a lot of the time. So it's been a really fun challenge to sort of like do what you think of as traditional Marvel music, but then also do what is this other environment that is nothing like that at all.
Do you have a favorite piece that or kind of a favorite score for one of the characters? Or
I do. It's at the end of, I believe it's at the end of episode 2. And it is this scene that is these two sort of anonymous sort of, I think they call them beekeepers, but they're sort of inspectors who are sort of trying to assess this area that they've heard something's going on in, but they don't know what's happening. And from out of that, the appearance of the Thing from the Fantastic Four, who no one is expecting to show up, just appears. And so that music starts and it's very sort of mechanical sounding. And then as the Thing starts to become present and you realize he's going to destroy everything in his path, the music gets louder and louder and sort of more and more epic. And you're just generally met with this sort of awesome force of the Thing on just a rampage, ready to destroy everything.
Clobbering time.
Yeah, clobbering time. Exactly. He does in fact say this. So yeah, that's kind of what I was working up to, is like, and so it's this great sequence in which people are like, huh, that's weird. Everything around here is destroyed. I wonder what happened. And then all of a sudden the Thing appears and you're like, oh, I know what happened. So it was fun.
Now, do you have a certain process you use when you're like, working on, putting things together, from your ideas or what, the tone you want to convey?
So this process was really interesting because, like I said, when I was introducing myself, normally most of the time I'm doing the music and the sound design as together. But in this particular project, because I was collaborating with 1000 Birds and they're the sound designers, we had to have extensive conversations that was like, okay, here's what I'm thinking of doing. What are you all thinking of doing? So that we could sort of plan that my music would complement what they're creating. So there was a lot of pre-conversation about that. And then there were conversations with the director about the tone of the music and what we were looking for. And then once you sort of have those initial ideas kind of cemented, the actual creating the music is really like I am listening to the voices, the performances, and the first time I hear them in the process. So I get a version of the show where it's just voices and nothing else. And then I get a version that is with voices and some sound effects. And then much later down the road, I get a version with voices and all the sound effects. So when I'm listening to the version that's just the voices, I'm really trying to tune in to their individual performances and how they're acting, and thinking about how the music could complement those performances and support those performances. So it's a lot of pre-planning. And then it really is a lot of instinct when you hear the thing and you think, oh, the way this guy is saying this line, I should change the music to really match the way they're saying that. So that's kind of how it works.
So kind of followed up with, that, how is, doing music for like a podcast different from doing it for like a play? I mean, you've kind of already talked about it. Is there anything, more or anything you had to like learn as you went along? Or
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the biggest difference between doing music for a play where you have live actors performing every night versus something like a podcast where the performances are recorded is that in a podcast, no matter how many times you listen to the performances, they'll always be exactly the same because they're recorded and they'll land a certain way. So as a result, you can really tailor the music very specifically to those recorded performances. In a theater, the actors are saying the same lines every night, but they're not always saying them the same way or with the same speed or in the same time. So the music has to be a little more modular and it has to be a little more flexible in how it operates so that it can change as the actor changes. So In both versions of theater or podcasts, the acting performance is leading the sort of how I'll help them. But because it's recorded, I can really get down to the closest detail of like accenting with music, very specific beats in a way that I would never be able to do with theater. So it's really fun, and it allows a tremendous amount of creativity. And then I think the other thing I learned creating music for this is, I came into the project, and in particular, the way Wastelanders starts off in the beginning, it's a lot of sort of Star-Lord and
Hawkeye.
Yeah, and Star-Lord in particular is very sort of irreverent. You know what I mean? Like, he's always getting in trouble. He kind of shoots his mouth off a lot. He's kind of he's a guy who just sort of likes to have a good time. And some of the other characters in the show are a little more serious and a little more focused than he is. But, when I was originally creating music for it, I was trying to come up with music that could be as fun as possible to sort of complement Star-Lord's sort of style. And what I realized was that the Marvel people take this very seriously, and they didn't want the music to sound like it wasn't being taken seriously. So I sort of had to adjust things a little bit to sort of, convey the seriousness of moments while still being able to have a good time when Star-Lord shows up, because he's
especially like with his characterization with the classic rock and roll, and
he's a total loose cannon and is constantly getting himself in trouble, which I really, first of all, I really appreciate that, because I feel like I too am like that in many ways. So I really identify with Star-Lord. And I have a feeling if I was a Wastelander, I would probably be him.
So you also have done a Shakespeare. Which is easier, a Marvel or Shakespeare?
Boy, that's a great question. I'm very fortunate. I'm currently doing a podcast of The Winter's Tale for Next Chapter Podcasts. The Winter's Tale is the second to last William Shakespeare play that I haven't done. So after I finish The Winter's Tale, I will only have one William Shakespeare play left out of 37 that I haven't done. Which is harder? I'm going to say something really radical here, which is, in many ways, Marvel podcasts and Shakespeare podcasts are very similar to one another. Because they both Shakespeare plays and Marvel, any Marvel universe relies on a lot of action, on a lot of fantasy, on a lot of sort of like the supernatural, and also like science and space and all these really massive topics. And in many ways, William Shakespeare does a similar thing. His plays are very imaginative, and they require, they have war and witches and supernatural things, gods, all sorts of crazy things happen in William Shakespeare plays. So it wasn't until this moment when you asked me this question, but I really believe they're actually quite similar to one another. And in fact, I would encourage you all, if any Marvel podcast fans out there are like, man, now that Wastelanders is over, I don't have anything to listen to, please feel free to check out the Shakespeare podcast, because I have a feeling if you liked Wastelanders, you probably will like William Shakespeare as well. But in terms of which is harder, I'm going to say Marvel.
Or challenging.
Yeah, Marvel is slightly harder, because they do all sorts of crazy things in this series, and it requires a lot of changes of mood quickly. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. Is like one minute everything's fine, the next minute everything's crazy in Marvel. That's what that's how it works.
Now, once Wastelanders is over, are there any now that you've had this experience doing a comic book podcast, is there any character that you're a fan of, or that you would like to kind of tackle next if given the chance?
Well, I've already spoken of my love for Star-Lord and how much I identify with him. So I definitely feel like if there was a Star-Lord podcast, I would do that in a heartbeat. But I also, I think this podcast actually has given me a newfound appreciation of the Fantastic Four that I don't think I had before. Because, I really appreciated the Fantastic Four as a kid, reading their comic books, because they got all into sort of multi-adventures, but they're, as a team of people, they're all so totally different from one another. You know what I mean? Like, they're all like, Reed Richards is sort of straightforward scientist, kind of nerdy guy. The Invisible Girl is, seems much more sort of empathetic and an empath. The Torch always seems to be running off and getting into trouble. And Thing is sort of this wisecracking Joker who also happens to have amazing strength. And also a very funny perspective on life. So, like, in working with them as a team, I really enjoyed it because, like, them as the four of them are a very multifaceted personality team. Like, they're what changes with them all the time, in a way that, like, if I was doing somebody like Vision, who is very much sort of like a very specific and very sort of low key type of personality, that would be harder for me to maybe imagine where to go with it. Maybe not. But I love the multifaceted things that are messy about the Fantastic Four. And I think I could pitch a Fantastic Four podcast in which their personalities actually make things worse for themselves before they do other things.
Well, just listening to the little bits that they're involved with Wastelanders. I mean, you have a good foundation there. I'll tell you that.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I don't know. I would be thrilled to work for Marvel again anytime. I don't have any current plans to work with them, but if they have a new podcast and they need music, please call me. I'd be thrilled to work with them again.
And I think that adapting comic books to like the podcast format is kind of the new thing, because I mean Marvel's doing it. There's the Sandman from Audible, and and there's just a lot of good stories that would work in this this format. And they need people with your specific talent to kind of add and help build the world.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, I love the audio drama format. And I think that its resurgence as an art form, it was a big art form in the 40s and 50s when radio was sort of king. And now here we are.
I grew up, my dad would always play like The Shadow.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And I think it's a very powerful format because as the listener, you are an active participant in the story. You're using your imagination to visualize these characters and engage what they're going through. And like the part where it's not a movie, where you're not just seeing everything on the screen and you're completely passive, but as a participant, you're imagining what people look like and how events are happening. I think it's incredibly engaging. And I think you're right that because the Marvel characters and the stories are so fantastic and so sort of fantasy based and, can do anything in these stories. They can literally do anything in these stories. The audio drama format is really perfect for it.
I mean, I would say if I had to pick one, I'm more of a DC person. I've really enjoyed the Batman audio adventures because it's like the old timey radio.
Yeah.
That's
that.
another. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
So is there anything else that you wanted to mention about, the project, or, anything else wanted people to know about that, maybe you experienced while working on this?
I mean, I'm super proud of it. I think it was a real labor of love. Other things that I could tell you about it. So we mentioned Star-Lord and his sort of taste in classic rock. That was a whole sort of adventure unto itself, because we needed to choose songs that we felt like would be things that Star-Lord would pick and would DJ. And so I was sort of involved with the music supervision part of it, of just like, let's pick the songs for it. And so like the part where all of these people on the project we were all like, okay, what would he listen to? What would Star-Lord want to play? And I mean, I would say we generated a list of at least 250 songs, you know what I mean? That we were like, oh, he'd love this, and this would be great. And maybe he likes the 80s. Maybe he likes the 70s. No, we could go back to the 60s. You know, like we were coming up with all these different things. And so then it was like the hardest part was narrowing it down and then getting licensing for it, because we didn't have a huge budget for the music supervision. So it was like, okay, we're going to have to compromise some of our dreams here in order to get the songs that we want. So I felt like I had two jobs on this series. One was to write the music, and then the other was just to figure out what Star-Lord wants to DJ.
And I think I remember this correctly, but he sings Kokomo, doesn't he?
He does.
He does, yeah.
Yeah, Kokomo is very popular.
So where can people find out if they want to find out more about you and your work? Where can they go?
Oh, that'd be great. Please come visit my website. It's lindsayjones.com. And I'm also on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. All of my hash signs are Mr. Lindsay Jones, LINDSAYJONES. And I've got other projects out in the works. If you're into podcasts, I have The Winter's Tale for Next Chapter podcast, which releases episode 4 this coming Friday. And I also work for a children's podcast called The Imagine Neighborhood, which is a super awesome podcast for elementary school age children to learn about their feelings and emotions, usually through crazy stories and music. And I do the music and sound for that. So if you have, if any listeners out there have school age children, I can't recommend The Imagine Neighborhood enough. It's a really fun podcast, and you can find that at imagineneighborhood.com.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to chat. And again, I'm really enjoying your part of the Wastelanders production, and I'm kind of sad that there's only a few more episodes left.
I know, me too. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad you're enjoying the podcast, and thanks again for having me here. I'm really, I'm super glad to meet more people who are fans of the Marvel comic book thing. It's a great experience.
Well, you're welcome back anytime. I mean, even if you're not doing anything comic book related, then I'd love to chat with you some more. So
okay, sounds great. Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Well, have a good evening.
Thanks. You too. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.